The process of transitioning from beginner to intermediate can be a slow-going process and can be one of the most frustrating yet rewarding times along the surfing journey. Watching our surfing heroes, it can be difficult to find the patience to trust the process through this developmental stage, because who doesn't want to hang 10 and get barreled now? In this video, you're going to find out the approach to take to advance to the intermediate level of surfing and provide you with the knowledge to feel confident you're on the right path so you can have fun and continue along the surfing journey. If you like what we're doing here, feel free to give us a follow. This is tip time. Now let's get into it. Okay guys, welcome back to another segment of Tip Time, where we take a deep dive into your questions. Today we had a question from Lance, who was asking for footage to go through the developmental stages. Whilst I don't have any footage from the beginner stages, I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to go through the key aspects that will lead you from going from a beginner to an intermediate surfer or an intermediate longboarder. We'll cover three main aspects today that I think will really help, as well as something to avoid. So let's get into that now. If you have any questions for upcoming Tip Times, we do these weekly, so make sure you leave a comment below and we can get to that next time. So the first thing that I actually wanted to speak about is something that we shouldn't do. And this is probably the most common thing that I see limiting people's progression from a beginner to an intermediate. And it's, I guess, looking at our heroes, looking at the icons of surfing and seeing what they're doing and wanting to emulate that in our own surfing at this time. Obviously, in the beginning stages, there is a lot that we need to add to our skill set in order to be able to carry these maneuvers out properly. Now, for longboarding, you might think of this as your cross-stepping, your nose riding, your big drop knee turns, everything like that. The same thing applies for shortboarding as well. A good example for this is aerials in shortboards. If we don't have the correct fundamentals down, we won't be able to do airs and get in the air. Things like positioning on the wave, being able to develop your speed and the skill to be able to actually perform the air, these are all going to be limiting factors. And if we go from, I guess, learning to stand up on a board straight to trying an air, we're not going to know how to generate speed and we're not going to know how to do it properly. Now, the exact same thing goes for longboarding. If we're trying to nose ride and we're trying to do big turns, but we haven't gotten some key fundamentals down in the lead up to these, this is where we can actually hinder our progress a little bit, and we are missing some of the fundamentals. So it's really good to make sure you're building a fantastic foundation to begin with, and then you can build on top of this once you're at the intermediate level to add some more maneuvers to your skill set, and you'll have a lot more success with a lot of your surfing in the future if you're able to get these key fundamentals down first. And it's paramount that we learn the fundamentals so that we can get this right. So if we don't have the fundamentals down, we're going to have a lot of trouble with this, and this will present when we're learning all of these difficult maneuvers, and we might have to backtrack and go and learn these fundamentals. So best to learn them now in the beginner phase so that we don't have that problem in the future. So what we'll do now is we'll speak about the main things I think are really important to make sure you're nailing to get your surfing to the intermediate level, and then you can try and layer on these difficult maneuvers with a better foundation so you can have better success into the future. So the first thing that I really wanted to speak about was being in the right part of the board for the right part of the wave, and depending on the maneuver that we want to be performing as well. So often I see that we're in the wrong part of the board to commit the turn to gain our speed, and this is where we can actually come unstuck. As a general rule, we want to use the middle of the board to gain speed, the tail of the board to turn, and then the nose of the board, of course, to nose ride. If you're watching the video at the moment and you're considering that you're actually doing most of these things, so trying to gain speed, balance, and turn all from the same position without moving backwards and forwards on the board, then this might be the next thing for you to consider. Now, if you're also thinking, well, I know that I'm staying in the same position on the board, but I haven't learned to cross step yet. So how do I get myself backwards and forwards on the board? Which is a really good question. What I like to consider doing is these small steps backwards and forwards with the front foot or the back foot to make sure we're refining our position on the board, place ourselves in a better position to be able to commit a turn or to be able to gain speed. Now, these can be considered as shuffling. Shuffling that you definitely want to avoid is anything quick and breaking trim. So you want to make sure that these movements, whether it's just poking the back foot back, bringing the front foot forwards, or if you're bringing both feet at the same time, you want to make sure it's a nice and smooth process, and it has a purpose as well. So we're not just shuffling forwards to try and get to the nose. We're doing small refined movements of the back foot, the front foot, in order to bring us further into the tail, further towards the middle of the board, so that we can actually make sure that we're in the right position and we can complete these maneuvers properly. The other option here is, again, doing things from the same position on the board, which won't work in the long term. And so it's really good to get this early. But it goes without saying that the gold standard here is being able to cross step up and down the board to place yourself in the right position. So what you should probably try and get to in the future, once you've got this down and once you've got what we've spoken about down as well, is making sure that you are able to cross step up and down the board to bring yourself and to gain access to these different positions on the board. Now, the second thing here is making sure that you have a position that can be your go-to position that you come back to gain balance. As longboarders, we see some of our favorite longboarders coming into very tall, upright positions, arching their back, bringing in all of these lovely stylistic elements, which we definitely want to try and emulate as well. I know that's something I like to, or try to put into my surfing. But if we begin with this from the get-go, it can be a very unstabilizing and unbalanced position to come into. So what we need to do is have in the back of our minds a position that we can come back into to stabilize. Now, if we're thinking about the most stable position to come into, there's 3 steps that we can typically follow. The first thing is making sure that you bend your knees. If you have your knees really, really straight, I like to think that this gets rid of all of our shock absorption. So we need to bend our knees to make sure we're nice and stable. The second thing is rotating the chest forwards. Having the chest forwards gives us a really good baseline of where we're heading. So we're going to be making sure our chest is directed towards where we're going, which is much better than being on the side and limiting ourselves from being able to turn and rotate in the directions that we need. So as a baseline, chest comes forwards. And then we're also going to make sure that we have our chest over our front foot. So leaning forwards, drawing that line from the chest, knee to the toe. This is the fundamental position that we need to come into when we're surfing if we're off balance. You'll see this, everybody from Kelly Slater landing from a big maneuver to Joel Tudor landing from or coming back from a nice nose ride. They come into this nice position to stabilize, and that's when they can then stabilize and get themselves into the next position to commit a turn or do whatever they're going to do. So it's really, really important. Now, the last fundamental that I think we need to make sure we're progressing to or learning in order to get ourselves to that intermediate level is gaining speed. Now, I think this is a massively overlooked area of longboarding and of surfing in general when we are trying to step through. And if we don't have the guidance to learn how to gain speed, this is where we can have a lot of trouble when we do go to those more difficult maneuvers. If we're trying to pull off some good nose rides, good turns, anything like that, but we don't know how to generate speed, we don't know where we should be, then everything becomes a lot more difficult. Now, the key things here, especially in the beginning stages, is people will stay down the bottom of the wave. Now, the bottom of the wave is closer towards the flats, and so we're going to actually be losing speed. Where we want to be to make sure we're maintaining and generating speed is in that top half of the wave. So this is something that if you've got to try and identify where you are in the wave, and you've got to try and bring yourself up to that top half in order to be able to move with speed and generate speed along the wave. Now, the most common thing that I see here is people's boards facing too far towards the beach. If you're facing the board towards the beach, you've got no option but to track down the face of the wave towards the bottom. So what we need to do instead is angle our board further across the wall of the wave so that we're going directly across. We can place pressure on either side of the rail to make sure we're coming and drawing ourselves up the wave so that we can track right across it. The other thing that's going to affect our speed is where we are with respect to where the wave's breaking. Of course, if we're too far out on the shoulder, this is where we're going to lose all of our speed because the wave is slower. So it's also about knowing how to redirect ourselves back towards the critical part of the wave. So where the wave's breaking and where the wave is at its steepest. So staying high, staying critical is going to be really, really important for maintaining your speed. And that's probably that last fundamental aspect that if we get that down and we're confident with, it'll give us a lot of success as we come into these more difficult maneuvers later down the track. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that little deep dive into the best ways to make sure you're moving from that beginner phase to the intermediate phase of your surfing. Again, I think these are really important that you make sure you get these first. As we spoke about at the start, if we learn or we're trying to do these other maneuvers in the future, such as cross-stepping and such as nose riding, but we don't have these foundations, this might be where you notice a significant plateau in the future and you just can't quite get something, because if you think about we're not having any success with our cross-stepping, a lot of the time that's going to be, firstly, technique. Yes, absolutely. But if we're down the bottom of the wave and we don't know how to position ourselves in the correct position, we've got no hope of getting to the nose because we're always going to nosedive. If we're really, really slow, that's also when we're going to be most wobbly. So again, bottom of the wave positioning is going to be an important thing there. We can also consider the positioning on the board and being able to dictate that properly before we start cross-stepping. And of course, to get to the nose, that's really, really important as well. So there's just so much that does go into it. So I hope that all makes sense. If you have any questions at any point, please leave them in the comments below. If you feel like you need any further direction with that, then as I've said a few times before, I do online coaching or face-to-face coaching. So I'd be more than happy to step through that with you, create some goals and make sure we've got a good plan and system ahead of how we're going to, I guess, tackle these sort of things and get you doing the maneuvers and the surfing that you want to be doing, which is super exciting. But other than that, I think we'll leave that there today. So we do these weekly. So if you have any things that you'd like to cover in the next one, please let me know. Leave them in the comments below so we'll be able to get through that Wednesday. We've also got the Sunday glide coming up this Sunday. Until then, hope you guys are getting waves and we'll catch you on the next one. You.